Indira,
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I am doing okay. I'm doing okay. I'm in the library again. Means we're talking
You're
about
in the
serious
library.
subject.
Yes.
Serious subject. I'm not in the library when we're not talking about serious stuff. Well, we always talk about serious stuff, but you
Yes.
know,
Really serious when you're in the library.
yeah, yes. Well, we should say we intend it to be. We're not sure, right? All right.
Correct.
You've only got three choices in life. You can either give up, give in, or give it all you've got. Now, that comes from my former professional community. We have about 30 of these that are meant to either motivate you or one way or the other. And there is a whole theme. It is motivating you to stay with it or to quit,
Mhm.
right? One of the two. And so, um, I thought we'd talk about today is are the eight characteristics of a great leader. I thought we'd go deeply into this. We have somebody that needs it actually for something they're doing next week. So we decided we would put this front and center and do this deep dive video. So if I could ask you, I'd like to share the mindset of the leader chart, the radar screen, and allow you to take everybody through what that is, why we've done it, and then we can transition over to the eight characteristics, and you and I can talk about that. And then we can go into a deep discussion. So I'll just put up a couple of slides, and we'll take them down, and we'll have our discussion. Okay.
Very good.
Let me share the chart here. So I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss the mindset.
The mindset of a leader is the starting point. When I talk with students, I say that the mindset of a leader is based in knowledge and understanding of the marketplace, customers, competition, the industry, products, business and social factors, the capabilities of the company, and so forth. And I encourage students to start building their mindset from their very first day on the job when they're in their early 20s. And then over time, continually building their mindset so they can develop more information, do more thinking, have more tools at their fingertips, so that when they need to, they can draw on their mindset to make the decisions they need when they're in leadership or high management positions to do their work at a very high level.
And then we have another group that we spend a fair amount of time with, and that are the people that are actually using these tools or
Correct.
need the tools, and we help them use these tools to deal with difficult and complex situations. Um, and so there are two sides to it. One is um, to become aware of what will help you be able to properly see your context, your defined context, and then be able to make sure you're equipped with the capabilities to be able to quickly analyze what's going on and quickly deal with what's going on, all the way from having to lead something to analyzing something to putting together a strategy for it to putting together an organization to deal with it. And then what are you trying to achieve ultimately? Because we believe everything leads to a value exchange. Now, that's a really harsh term, Deirdre, I know, but uh, spend a second on value exchange because when we choose not to call it monetization because monetization is only one aspect of a value exchange. Um,
Yes. We talk about a company operating in a marketplace needs to give value. And remember that value is in the eye of the marketplace, not in the view of the company. But even while it's giving value, it needs to get value. And that value, it can be money, it can be an exchange of goods, it can be access to something, it can be building a reputation, a client base, or whatever, but there has to be some sort of exchange there between the company that is offering something and its marketplace.
and use two other examples. Let's use indirect monetization. Why don't you describe a not-for-profit in that same context?
Well, not-for-profits, for example, may need to build their reputation in the marketplace so that they can get the funding that they need. Most not-for-profits are always going out getting funding, but it's getting increasingly difficult for not-for-profits to get the funding. So what a not-for-profit has to do is create this indirect market. Well, I guess it's a direct market exchange with the people it is serving, but then an indirect one when it is going out to get funding. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a not-for-profit that works on preserving nature sites, that it does this for the community, and in return it gets thanks from the community and probably the opportunity to stand up at town meetings, explain their work, get further projects, and so forth. That's a real value exchange. But then when the not-for-profit is going out to get funding, it can show this work, show the value that it created in order to get the funding from the funder.
Actually achieve the actual exchange, right? So this is what this, and the reason we're spending time on this is because this is ultimately what a leader does. They observe what's going on and they make sure that there is an appropriate exchange going on. So in the case of a not-for-profit, what Deirdre was just describing was the value they're giving, and normally this entity, if it were a for-profit, it would be giving something to a user, an end user, who then they expect to return equal value. And in fact, most of the time, the entity wants an excess of value, right? If it's for profit, they want a slight excess. That is profit, right? That's why they call them a for-profit. They're providing something of value, and they want in return slightly larger return of value. Now, that can be monetary, it can be an information, it can be an influence. There can be all kinds of things that work. Now, let's take a not-for-profit. A not-for-profit provides good works into the community. They are going to receive a value back, but it's not going to come from the same people that they exchange the positive value from. They have to look at another place to give them. So the exchange, and this is why we call it an indirect exchange of value, because you're not getting a direct exchange from those people. Now, they do value it, hopefully, and they are appreciative. And almost every time we've seen this, there is, for the most part, people that you are providing not-for-profit value to appreciate it at some level. But then it's your job, as Deirdre was saying, to then package that the value that you're providing and show it to people who are willing to fund you to provide it. That's an indirect monetization. Now, let's take it to one other group. Let's talk about first responders. First responders are providing a value to the market. And for them, most of them are never going to be compensated to the quality of the value that they provide, right? We know this for sure. Take people that fight fires, right? They'll never get back the value. But part of that value exchange that they are receiving as individuals is the satisfaction they have in providing that to the community. And they get a great deal of satisfaction in doing that. You have to meet their basic needs and make their lives comfortable. That's the net of it. That's where it has to, that's kind of the floor. You have to make their lives comfortable as best you can. But we expect those people to work 24 hours a day when necessary, and they do. And so the world is full of value exchange, whether you're monetary or not. And in that case, we're taking taxpayer money, providing it to a government. The government provides that to an organization. The organization then hires firefighters, and then the firefighters go out and do the work. And hopefully those people are paying their taxes so they, the exchange happens. But it's a true indirect exchange. Now, why have we spent so much time on this? Because the job of a leader is to solve that last equation. What is that value exchange? what is the value proposition that you're providing and you're selling to get the value back? What value are you giving? What value are you getting? And then what we'll talk about today are these 8 characteristics. And so, Deirdre, what I thought we'd do is just for a moment, we'll step through these quickly. Then we'll take the chart down. Then what I'd like to do is to go through and have you interview me on each one of these and help me be able to elucidate these for everybody.
Okay.
But I'll go through them just quickly for you. This is about being a leader, the essential qualities. And we all ask this question. All of us that have done this work, Deirdre, me, all the people that work with us and have studied with us and are still working for us with us, and that those who ask for our guidance and our advice. And this is what we've boiled down to what we think it takes to be a leader, to function as a leader. And one of the questions I know, Deirdre, is on your mind is this something that works in all cultures? Is this something you're born with, or can you learn this, right? We'll deal with that when we get into the details, but I know you have a whole set of questions that are contextual as you want to get into.
Right.
And so we do think about this because both Deirdre and I have operated and run international businesses, and Deirdre practically lived abroad in one of our companies. I think you actually would have lived abroad if it worked for your life. So the first is that you think strategically, you use sound judgment, and you make effective decisions. We've talked about this a long time, Deirdre, that I have a friend who, again, we try not to use names unless they're famous in their own right and so forth. So I'm not going to give you a name here, but this is somebody that many of you would know, many of you would know, who's a very famous and successful not only founder and CEO, but nowadays a professional public board director, and has served on many of the names of companies that if I said them, you'd know them, and even to this day. He will always tell you the most important characteristic that he sees in anybody he deals with is that second one, sound judgment. Because he says every time he sees somebody fail, they fail because of a lapse of judgment in something. And you and I, Deirdre, have lived through a couple of these with him, right? Specifically where he had to take the CEO of a very large public company that many of us use the services of every single day, had to take them out of their job because they had a lapse in judgment. Now, we would say not just a lapse in judgment, but they did something that was just a value issue, something we would have, almost all of us would have a value issue with. But be that as it may, he acted very quickly, and it happened on a Saturday, and the incident happened on a Saturday. He found about it on Sunday when he and I were going somewhere together in the car. We had to stop, and he came back, and we got in the car and we started talking about this. But his center was on number 2, not number 2, the second part of number 1, that you have to use sound judgment. Obviously, you're expected to think strategically. Now, Deirdre, we think the term strategically means not tactical.
Very much not tactical. In fact, we make a great distinction between work that is strategic for the leader and work that is more operational and tactical for the manager. In fact, one of the issues I will probably get to in a little bit is what do you do when someone who's promoted to a leadership position continues to act as a manager? But we'll get to that.
And notice it goes on to say you do not act without a strategic foundation. You do not make rash judgments, and you do not make decisions that cannot be executed effectively. Now, in our discussion, we'll go through each of these because they are critical. And you may say, does a first responder act with a strategic foundation? Because you're saying don't act with that one. I will tell you that there is an example I will give you, and I think you'll understand what a strategic foundation of a decision means. that can be done in a matter of seconds. Number two, you get the job done. You take full responsibility for everything within your purview. It's your job to deliver results while being responsible for everything under your purview. You do not make excuses and you do not blame. Now, I will tell you, I do not work with people or in organizations that do not meet the first two. I just do not. Now, most of the time, people that don't meet the first two, they violate number three, which is they don't do their own work. They don't make their own individual contribution. They believe that is not what they should be doing. They expect you to make all the contributions. But that you use the leverage of the organization, delegation, and management appropriately. So you understand how to delegate responsibility. But remember, it has to fit within the first two concepts. So you have your own work. In today's world, with the tools we have, the responsibility of a leader has shifted. Now leaders have their own work to do, Deirdre, right? And this is something we have to make a point to people. You're expected to do your own email. You're expected to, in a lot of cases, find a way to manage your own calendar, or at least part of your calendar. Manage your own time. You cannot put the hands of your time in the hands of somebody else. Your time is the most valuable thing you have beyond your health. So everybody has to do their own work, and it's your job to figure out what is your work, your individual contribution. And then how do you use the leverage of organization, delegation, and management to give you that leverage that you need, that leading an organization is about? And this is about leading the work of others. You're a leader, doer, and a user. So most everybody, and I've had this discussion with a number of people, it's very hard to lead an organization today that is a product company where you don't use your own product. Yes. Meaning the organization doesn't, your people don't, or you don't. One of the things that we always did was we, in the companies that Deirdre and I built together, we used our own product. And we then understood how the user functions with it. You do not do work that can be delegated. So you understand what delegation truly is and how it fits with the other points that we're making here. And you do not have others do the work of your individual contribution. It is your job as the leader to understand your context and understand your market. And yes, you can have others in the organization that understand it equally well and perhaps even better, but you need to have a basic understanding of it. So in other words, you have to know the territory that you are leading as best you can. You have a bias for action. That's number 4. High quality considered action. Considered action meaning thoughtful action, fitting with the above characteristics. You do not act first and plan later. You plan first and act second. And we'll talk about how this fits in emergency situations, how planning matters. Whether that plan occurs in 1 second or 2 seconds because you properly trained yourself for these environments, or where you haven't, you take a second and say, are there any real risks here I need to quickly just think my way through? Balancing that against the time you have to solve the problem. You are not passive. You promote, demand, and celebrate excellence. That's it. Not anything but excellence, whether that's excellence in teamwork, it's excellence in taking responsibility for something. But you don't, the point there is that you would not celebrate participation unless it's part of what your ethos is. And that could be a not-for-profit, where part of the ethos as a not-for-profit is that you participate in certain activities and participation is an objective. Then you celebrate it. Again, you do not accept anything less than excellence, or whatever that excellence is defined in the ethos of your organization and what you're leading in any part of the organization. So we all know you cannot have an excellent organization that has a lousy function, because you, as we even said yesterday when we were on a different subject, you always end up settling on the lowest level of execution. So you're only as strong as the weakest link in your chain. You remain an expert in your field and the marketplace. So you don't lead things you don't know anything about unless there's an emergency situation and you have to, because what's valued then is not the expertise, it's the leadership at the moment, because then there is no one else. You see the strategic gaps in the marketplace. You're constantly learning. You're a learning machine that has an open mind and has a mind that is curious and questioning, meaning that you're constantly making sure that you see the world as you have a set of opinions, but that opinion set you have, which is mine and Deirdre's, is an opinion of one. There is space for a lot of other opinions, and it's just what you see, and what you want in return is people to listen to you. That's what you want in return. So you have an opinion of one, and you use that opinion of one depending on how you have to use it. But you are constantly learning and evaluating, and you're intellectually honest enough to know to question that opinion and to listen to the expertise of others and incorporate it where you see value, considering 1 through 5. You do not delegate the subject of expertise of what you lead, meaning you can have another person who's just as expert as you are, but you have to maintain your expertise on your own. You can't say, I don't need to be an expert because I have somebody on my field, in my field, who is. And there are so many examples of that. Just think of the medical field. You don't want to walk in and have all the people around it be more expert than the person who's going to do the actual surgery on you. You do not allow yourself to become stale. We all know that if you don't do the things we just talked about, you don't see yourself as having just a very narrow slice of opinion. Your opinion doesn't matter about everything, and that you have to entertain the ideas of others and put them right beside yours. You have to be intellectually honest in how you see others and yourself, and you have to be a learning machine so that you're constantly questioning and building on your expertise. If you don't do that, if you delegate that, which we've seen, Deirdre, you and I have lived in an organization, not very long, but we lived in an organization where you saw somebody who delegated expertise in there. In their mind, that was the way you did it. You hired a consultant to come in to be the expert. So what happens? You become stale. You can become stale the moment you leave high school, or whatever school that was the last place you were at. You were at. My South Carolinian background coming through, Deirdre. The last school you attended, which could be a grammar school for all we care. We don't care. What we care about is you're a learning machine. That's what we care about. You communicate the good and, well, I shouldn't skip 6 because that's a very important one, right? You build teams and culture, defining and nurturing those teams to fit your context, meaning not your context, but the context of the market you're dealing in. And this is the point about number 5. You have to know what that context is so you can build a culture around that context. And this gets into part of the issue for how is this applied to another culture? Well, it applies to the context of the culture. You have to define what that context is. You have to define the culture based on that context. And then you lead in that context. And you do this by attracting people, you do recruiting, you cultivate outstanding talent for the organization. And by the way, when you see somebody fail the first few, they fail all the way through this, almost always, right? I mean, we saw a dramatic example of this recently where somebody just failed every single one of these. But that's not unusual. If you're failing the first couple, it's a good possibility that you're going to, blatant fail, meaning none of those apply. It's a likelihood you're going to fail all these. And then you have to decide as an individual, do you have the flexibility and the freedom to be able to extract yourself? And I have to say, most of the time, we all know most people do not have that freedom and flexibility, and they're stuck. but at least they know what they're dealing with and can learn, because we can all learn from both good and bad examples. You assess all the operational and strategic needs of the organization. You give the team the credit for what they do and develop a positive and productive culture, not letting negativity creep in or losing talent you do not want to lose. Meaning there is talent you always want to lose. People become stale, people become negative, people change, everything changes. And it's your job to make those hard judgments. And by the way, just because we've evaluated this and have done the work on this, doesn't mean we meet this standard. I wish we met all this. This is what we aspire to, or I should say, I aspire to. You do not drive talent away. How many times have we seen this, Deirdre, where the leader actually drives people out of the organization? We saw somebody come into a job and within months, everybody was gone. And of course, they blamed it on something else, but it was because of them. Not because of them. They are fine in their own right, I'm sure. It's because of what they did.
Right.
You communicate the good and the bad in a clear, persuasive, and effective way. So you don't shade in one direction or the other, and you know how to communicate bad with good. And that's a very hard thing to do, to communicate bad news. Very hard thing. We are certainly not experts in that. But you know how to do this with everyone. You don't just know how to do it with certain people. And this comes with work. And I believe that comment with everyone means you treat everybody as a person first. You see people as a person first. Somebody that's helping you do something, whether that be at a hardware store. You look at them in the eye and you see them as a person first, and you ask them how they're doing, and you appreciate what they're doing for you. That's what we mean by with everyone, using the most appropriate method. What you do with that person helping you at the hardware store is different than how I deal with Deirdre, because they think and they function on different planes of society. You have to be flexible and understand that about the world. And you need to be able to speak their language. If you're sitting in Germany, like I was as a kid, you have to speak German, but I have American parents, so I had to speak English. You have to speak the language of the people. Ensuring everyone understands what, when, and why of the organization. And Deirdre, I know you'll later on get into the management, not today, but later, we'll do a deep dive on the management model, the leadership and management model, and we'll tell you that it's the leader's job to define what, when, and why of the organization, and it's the manager's job to figure out how they're going to do it, who's going to do the work for the most part, and then actually doing the work. You do not hamper openness in the organization. You do not remain silent. And we've seen this before where, and unfortunately, becoming silent can sometimes be a defense mechanism for being attacked. But you can't do that. You have to, as a leader, I say start your underwear. I know that's a terrible saying, Deirdre. That's one from the government service I was in. But it's essentially, you have to get up in the morning. I had to tell somebody that not long ago, a friend. You need to just put some starch in your underwear, because you've got to get up and fight the battle. Right? You solve problems and exploit opportunities. And that is the point. Too many times we see this, Deirdre, in strategic presentations that are brought to us, they're trying to solve a problem. And a lot of the entrepreneurial work is around solving a problem. That's perfectly fine. But there are two parts to a market. One is solving a problem. The other is exploiting opportunities. And that's what a strategic gap is. It's not just to solve a problem, but it could be to exploit something that hasn't even been defined as a problem yet. And that's why we see when you focus your whole attention as an entrepreneur on solving problems, that's fine, but it may not be properly exploiting that gap in the market that you've identified that you think you can extract value from. So it means you're only going to extract part of the value. By the way, that may be the right thing to do, because that may be the easier side of the equation. And maybe act two for what you do for your second stepping up to the bat is that, but at least you know it. You do not create problems. And again, if you don't do the first 7, you're likely to be doing that, right? Do you, because you're creating problems as you're functioning. And that is always the giveaway, right? When you see a new leader, if you see a new leader that's been in place for a while and you find out that they're creating problems, which is usually when Deirdre and I see something, they're creating problems. And so they come to us and they say, this isn't working. Well, what's the evidence it's not working? They're creating problems. That's when you realize you have an issue with leadership. And usually it gets to be something we'll talk about in a moment, but you don't let strategic opportunities evaporate. This is the point about problem solving versus opportunity exploitation. You could be letting the opportunity that has more value and more ability for you to extract evaporate on you while you focus on the problem side. After the first 3 months you own the problem, look, this is, again, I shouldn't have named my friend here, but his comment is, look, I'll give you something to do, but if after 3 months you don't, nobody else owns this problem, you own this problem. And Dieter, we've seen people who a year later are still blaming the same person, and 2 years later now, or a year and a half, they're still blaming the same person for something. You know, my buddy Les Brun said years and years ago, after the first 3 months, after I've handed you a problem, you own it, because you have had now plenty of time to do whatever changes you needed to make to start getting results. And if you're not getting results, you own that problem. And this is the most important thing. It's about fit. You either fit something or you do not. We talked about this yesterday. Did that book that you reviewed for us, Deirdre, the Blue Ocean Strategy, did it fit us? Well, it doesn't fit us in our context today. It actually fit me years ago. And as I said to you, it may fit me again, right? There may be another context where you and I can see how it might fit us. It just doesn't fit our context, but it does have value. And the question is, where does it fit? This is the point about almost all leadership positions. You as the leader, when you're looking at a new position, have to decide, do I fit? Or if the organization is changing and you can't control that change, you have to look and say, do I fit? Or if the organization has changed unto itself because the market has changed and you don't fit in that market anymore, you have to take yourself out because you are not fitting. So one of the most important things to understand is, do you fit whatever's going on? Because if you don't, then you will never get a clear answer out from most people who will, most people will never tell you you don't fit something anymore, right? Because they think that's a bad thing. I actually think that's a good thing. I would rather they say to us, you know, you don't fit what I'm doing, because that's a much easier thing to understand than you violated one of those 8 characteristics. So I've gone through this, Deirdre, and described it, and I know I've hogged the conversation and I haven't given you a chance to talk about any of these things. You can tell I'm passionate about this because as somebody who's run companies for over 20 years now and deliberately left very large organizations because I wanted to run my own, when I see this not working well, it really gets me. And it gets me to the core. And I wish I could do all this well. I can't. But this is what I aspire to. And again, this is an opinion of one. It's a thought process that I think works. And I think it worked yesterday. I think it works today. And I think it'll work in the future. So with that, Deirdre, I'm going to turn it over to you for a second. You tell me when to take this down, and we'll have a discussion about each one of these in more detail.
Well, why don't you take it down now so we can talk directly to each other
Okay.
about it? Okay.
All right. It's gone.
I see it's gone.
I'm sorry that I'm so passionate about this at times. It's just, I guess, you know, the problem with it is we don't, and I shouldn't say this. I think that I see too much bad leadership, but you and I just went through 2 days of describing outstanding leadership.
Correct.
I really shouldn't, because I shouldn't let the poor leaders, do that. And also then we see the unfortunate people that are just stuck in a bad fit. And I've had 2 really good friends that are stuck in bad fits. And it's very difficult for them to reconcile. And I've had both actually fly here because as you know, I'm in mobile for a while, hopefully not too much longer, but for the last 3 years, essentially, I've been that way. And effectively for the last year, hard. Um, they've come here and actually talked with me person to person about it. And I keep telling them it's fit. Fit is a very easy thing to understand and to accept. Just accept it and don't fret, right? And you were telling me about the same thing the other day when I was fretting because fret is a Southern word. I was what's the right word, dear? I was concerned. I was and probably unnecessarily concerned about a conversation I've had with somebody who they're just not understanding something. And Deirdre's point is, look, the way you think doesn't fit with the way this person thinks. And so you cannot, no matter what you're going to do, you're not going to be able to get it across to that person. You need to just drop it. And so, and she's absolutely right. Easier said than done, Deirdre. And that's why my poor friends are suffering from the same problem. It's very hard to accept a fit problem that they then are the result, the negative side of it.
Right. Mhm. Okay. All right. Let's start our conversation by dealing with two questions that we've hinted at already. And one is, you know that I teach leadership courses. And some of my students, when I go through lists of characteristics like this, their jaws drop. They just say, I don't see how I can ever match this profile.
So, Deirdre, you should describe what your students are. These are professional people. You call them you're very kind to do that, but you're doing this a little bit hidden. These are professional people that many of them have their own businesses that they founded and are looking to you to provide guidance, right? So this isn't an
I will
18-year-old in
say.
undergraduate school, right? I just want to make sure that people understand the context. But
No, these are master's degree programs where people have anywhere from 5 to 35 years of experience.
And
And
some of these people you're advising also
yes,
outside of that, and
correct,
helping them with their businesses.
correct. Um, but I always get the question, well, is a leader born or is a leader made? And how would you make a leader? Or they turn it around and say, how can I start to look like that profile you had on the screen? What are your thoughts, Tom?
Oh, geez, I thought you were going to answer that one, dude.
Oh, I can answer that one.
Why don't you answer first? I've been talking now for 20 minutes.
Okay. You can make a leader. You can very much make a leader, but you have to think through the type of leader you want to become. It's unfortunate that in the United States, at least, there's this image of the leader's personality, the leader who's on all of the talk shows or quoted in the newspapers all the time. I would make the argument that those are not the best leaders because they are probably not spending the time doing the actual work in the business and delivering the results that need to be delivered. In fact, I think we've looked at that in many cases, Tom, and have seen that that's not happening. So it's almost more that the more a leader is out there doing publicity stuff, the less time is spent in the business. But it is actually very I was about to say very easy. I don't quite mean that you have to work at it, but the path to becoming a good leader is defined, and therefore you can follow that path easily. I combine your 8 characteristics with the mindset definition. And just as you and I were saying, that when you start out in your first job, maybe at age 21 or 22, you probably know nothing about management or leadership, but you start building your mindset by reading, experiencing, observing, taking on jobs, taking on volunteer work, and so forth. So that a decade or so later, when you move into managerial positions and leadership positions, you've acquired a mindset that defines how you operate as a manager and leader and gives you the substance from which you make decisions, develop strategies, develop and run operations plans, and so forth. So too with the characteristics. To the extent that the characteristics are coincide with some with the way you build a mindset, You can, for example, decide what area you're going to build expertise in and build that expertise and continue to build that expertise. You can develop the attitudes of the bias for action and taking responsibility and getting the job done simply by the way that you go about work. You can develop the habits of doing many of these characteristics by acting in that way. And then all of a sudden you are. That's what psychologists tell us, that if you want to build a habit, you act the habit and you become the habit, and so forth. You learn how to build teams by observing what teams work, what don't work, who is good about it, asking questions. Never hesitate to talk with someone at a higher level in an organization and ask them how they accomplished this, how they did this, how they think about this. People like to be asked such questions. Um, so that if you do these, if you learn, if you build your mindset, if you build your habits, all of a sudden there you are realizing that you're a leader. Now, you never stop. You always, as with the mindset, you always have to keep working on these characteristics. But by the time you're in the C-suite, you have a pretty good set of capabilities that are now inbred in a way. They're habitual. They're ways that you go about this work that will guide you to a successful job. Your thoughts, Tom?
So I definitely think you can make leaders. I think you should make leaders. I think they are to be made. I think it's incumbent upon people like us to help identify those people who can benefit from the guidance and the learning to become great leaders.
Yeah.
We also very quickly can tell whether we think somebody's going to be a great leader or not, just because you can't see a lot of those characteristics in how they function every day. I think if one of the ways that you can self-evaluate if you have that kind of a mind is you can look at those 8 characters. There are many ways to do this, but you can use ours. You could use those and say to yourself, do all of them interest you?
Yeah.
Because if they don't interest you, it's likely that you could lead something, but perhaps not sustainably. So you're what I call an episodic leader. You fit in a certain time, and there's time and place for almost all those kind of leaders. We've seen that before when people are really strong in certain characteristics and they just are not interested in others. They can become episodic leaders. This is the example of a Churchill, for example, that was able to lead brilliantly during the time that he fit.
Yes.
But later, when the times didn't fit him, the people didn't vote for him to be prime minister any longer because they saw the need for a different prime minister. It was the same thing that many people revered the individual that he replaced, which was Chamberlain. They revered him, but he didn't fit the context of what was going on at that moment. And so we see this in leadership a lot. It doesn't mean Chamberlain wasn't in his own context a great leader. And it doesn't mean that Churchill wasn't. It just means that they had a limited context.
I think what we are starting to talk about is, well, it's an extension of your concept of fit, that sometimes people don't want to rise above a certain level in an organization. You especially see this, or I've especially seen it among technology people who are very comfortable leading tech teams, love leading tech teams, and want to spend the rest of their lives doing that. That's excellent. Now, there's another aspect to this that I've got to mention. There are a number of people who feel that, oh, I've been in the organization for 5 years, so I should get a promotion to a manager level. No, it doesn't work that way. Maybe in certain situations, or certain companies or situations, it may work that way, that people who have a certain level of experience automatically get the next promotion. I think that's happening less and less. And I think it's one of the reasons, by the way, is the whole hybrid workplace, where I think people are self-selecting out of leadership and management positions. But I think more to the point that it is becoming very clear that you need good managers and good leaders, people who have shown that they can do the work. And if someone, even if they've been in a place for 5 years and have not shown that they've grown along the line of these characteristics, maybe they shouldn't get the promotion, regardless of how many years they've been around. And I say this is an extension of your concept of fit, because that's it. Of all of the people in the corporation, what percentage eventually rise to and should rise to management and leadership positions? 10%, 5%? No more than that. And if you can, frankly, get 10% of your people rising up through the ranks as good managers and leaders, you're doing a pretty good job culturally as a company, I think.
You are. You know, so to come back to your question, I think you can certainly build leaders and you can certainly become more of a leader. Whether you, now, if you're thoughtful about this, you will self-select what you want to do. I prefer not to be a celebrity. By the way, I'm not saying that it's even possible, but meaning I don't like publicity at all, none. So I don't even participate in social media, as you know, because I don't want any of that. Now, I have other professional reasons why that's a different issue, but I don't do that. It's not part of my ethos. So if the job requires that, I'm not a good fit. And public company CEOs, public company board directors, they have to accept that as part of what they do. Um, that's just not something I'm going to do. I want to do. And I selected a long time ago. I'm better to be somewhere else. Now, I probably wouldn't fit doing all that because I don't participate in what you'd have to participate in to do it well. Because it just doesn't fit my personality, my style. So part of it is you have to understand and just evaluate where you sit and how what you can do and what you can't do, what you want to do, what you like doing. And I realize that most people in this world, and the vast majority of people in this world, cannot do what they like to do or they want to do. They do what they have to do. And I do understand that. Even in the greatest countries in this world, you still have the vast majority of the people that are doing what they have to do. But those that can and have the freedom and the flexibility to be able to choose, that analysis is a big deal, is figuring out where do you fit and how do you fit and where can you best function without the stress and all the other things that come with not fitting, because not fitting doesn't feel good, right? It really doesn't. Now, that also presumes that you have a stable nature to yourself, right? That you are, fundamentally you have a core stability. Because if you're mercurial in all ways, that's going to make it very difficult for you to fit, because you most things require some form of stability, reliability, predictability. By the way, there are many that don't want that, right? The creative aspect. But you're going to give a concert, if you're a performer, there are a lot of things that people want you to be flexible and open-minded about and creative and, doing your own time. But if you're going to perform at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night, they actually expect you to be there, right? And prepared and ready to go and having done what you need to do. Now, we both know that it takes a tremendous amount of planning and preparation and thoughtfulness to be able to be ready to give that performance. So there is an aspect in everything somebody does, every position. It's always way harder than it looks from the outside. It always takes way more work, way more planning, way more thoughtfulness. And so can you develop becoming a leader? You bet you can. it's a hard job, and most people can't, they don't just come built that way, Deirdre. I mean, some do, some just do it naturally, and it's like falling off a log. And are there people that do it in a very unusual way that we may not want to work in their organization, but we love what they do? This was Steve Jobs, for example, did it in a very unusual way, failed miserably as an operating CEO. So was smart enough to pair up with the fellow that now runs Apple, and he really ran the operational aspects of Apple, while Steve Jobs was CEO and leading the culture and the ethos, and had a wonderful design person who left after Jobs passed, Johnny Ive, uh, and he helped create the culture and ethos behind the products, at least the product side and the usability side. Um, and that's a very unusual model, but it took a long time to get there. He went through a lot of pain and agony. Then you take Elon Musk, another person who you cannot say doesn't do amazing things. Right? I mean, he just accomplishes amazing things. Whether you like them or not, or whether you agree with them, or you believe they're being used appropriately, is a whole different issue. You and I don't, that's not what we do for a living, right? We observe what people are doing, how they're doing, and not, we don't care about the well, we do care, but we don't participate in making judgments about political aspects or, you know, um, those kind of things. So, but you cannot say he doesn't accomplish things. He's accomplished things that other people have wanted to do and haven't figured out how to do. And he's figured out not only how to do it, but he's done them. Right. So doesn't mean they're good and doesn't mean that they're being used for good purpose, but certainly has done them. There's somebody you look at and say that he leads in a very unusual way. He leads a life in a very unusual way. He leads a life that would be very hard to replicate for a normal human being. But he's effective in what he's doing. Do I want to work in that organization? No. Did I want to work for Steve Jobs? Maybe, but probably not. Because I think it would have been difficult. No matter who you are, I think it would have been difficult. You know, we almost sold a company to Microsoft, so I got to know Microsoft and their leaders really well at the time. This is not anybody who's currently there. And I just didn't fit. I couldn't fit with the culture. And this was when I was running my own company, when I was out of IBM. And it looked very much like what I left in IBM for the reasons I left IBM. Right? So you have to, and we didn't sell the company to them, but we did sell the company to somebody else. And I chose to not go because I didn't feel like I could fit doing that. So you have to, I think you can create environments for yourself. If you have this ability, you can create, your capabilities, but it takes great discipline and great resolve. So yes, you come with a set of skills and hopefully many of them fit. And then it's about building on top of those. And we spend and have spent a lot of time trying to identify these people and helping guide them where we can to becoming great leaders. That's what we do. And not only great leaders, but great founders too, where the position is appropriate. Deirdre, spend a second on cultural applicability of a model like this to leadership.
Well, I think that that I think culture is very important in any organization. As Drucker says, culture eats strategy for lunch. But it is the responsibility of a leader to define the culture that's needed in the organization. When I'm working with entrepreneurs, I take it even further and say that it's the responsibility of the leader to build the organization that's needed to do the work. And that includes not only culture, but also the resources, and that's funding, people, the tangible resources, and so forth needed to do it. So that culture works both ways in relation to these 8 characteristics. That the fit aspect is, does the leader operate according to these characteristics in a way that fits the current culture of the organization, or increasingly, if there isn't a strong culture in the organization, is this leader capable of building one? And frequently, the culture that a leader builds is built along the strength of each of these characteristics that the leader has. Is this culture responsible? Does this culture have a bias for action? Good teams, things like that. And so that's the way I see all of that going. Am I addressing your question, Tom?
Yes. Now take another one. How about applicability geographically around the world?
This is interesting because, as you know, the students that both of us have taught have come from many cultures around the world. Um, it's my, and I actually have to separate this out for some of the students. And I'm actually starting to slide into another area I think we should cover. And let me define that area and then come back to the people from other areas. And that is, we've been talking about the mindset of a leader and the characteristics of a great leader. We haven't yet touched on the whole concept of the understanding of the work to be done within the organization, not just the work to be done within the company, but the work that a leader does within a company. And this is what we set out in our leadership and management model, which is the complement, if people remember our radar screen, to the mindset and the characteristics. So, and I'll come back to that in a minute, because that's kind of an interesting area. So in relation to people from, say, other cultures, particularly, I will say, women from other cultures, where women may not be perceived as having leadership potential, or be seen as having the ability to direct men in their work and things like that. I talk about separating out the work to be done as a leader and the characteristics that they must pay attention, and they should have no trouble in doing the work of a leader that has to be done. And that's pretty much defined around this world. For the leader, it's building the strategy, building the initiatives, doing the oversight of execution, judging the results, delivering the results, and so forth. In relation to the characteristics and the mindset, by the way, you can build in whatever culture, whatever, whether you're, whatever your demographic characteristics and so forth, because that involves you as a person learning and practicing and observing and building habits. In relation to these characteristics, I advise students that they've got to be aware of these characteristics, that they have to operate along these lines to at least some degree, but they have to be able to put that in context of the culture in particular. It's a very difficult balancing act there. And the way I talk with some of the women in particular is that this is the sort of thing you spend some years practicing to do and observing and talking with women in leadership positions, so you can figure out how you yourself are going to handle, for example, your communications in a company where you may not be perceived as having the legitimacy of leadership and so forth. Again, am I addressing your question here?
Yes. So now I'm going to throw another point at you. What about that's you're in the context, right? And we have people that come to us, both as students and as CEOs, who are functioning in a vastly different culture than what we deal with here in the United States and in much of the European countries and in the extension of the European countries. But they're dealing in very different environments.
Right.
And our comments to them are along the lines of what you were just talking about. It's that it's your job to understand that context and that market and that culture and those people, and build your leadership skills around that with these thoughts in mind, using the values of the culture that work there. And if you don't like those, you either have to, depending on the flexibility you have in that environment, because many times you have no flexibility
Right.
because of just the structure of the society. You have a choice. You can either agree to function like that, or you try to find your way to a place where you can function more comfortably. So we have people, and now let's talk about the opposite, right? Let's talk about somebody who has done that. And we have somebody we're working with like that, who is a very powerful, capable woman leader who's come to the United States a number of years ago and is wanting to push her leadership skills to another level. How do you, and I know you are advising her, but how do you help her? How do you help her with this question, Deirdre?
First start by taking a solid look at the organization that she's in. What are the characteristics? Does she want to stay there? Does she want to build her career in this organization, or do the characteristics not seem to allow her to do that? Then what I strongly recommend is that she literally builds a map of the characteristics, the modes of operating of the leadership there, and create some sort of sense, probably through conversations with people, about how she herself would have to operate to move up in the company. Too many women, and particularly women from certain cultures around this world, tend to approach these things from a passive point of view. And one of the things I have to talk about is shifting from a passive mode to an active mode. That you may say, "Oh, this, this could never happen," and I have to ask a direct question. Have you tried to make it happen? Are you working in an active mode here? Certainly for the woman you're talking about, Tom, she's operating in the United States in a US entity. So she's going to have to operate by US rules. And what she has to do is to understand exactly what they are. These 8 characteristics, the mindset, our whole radar screen, frankly, is a
Mhm.
good guide for her to understand what she would have to do, how she would have to act, how she would be perceived as a leader. And then working with her to improve where there may be a slight lack. She just doesn't have that many bad lacks. um, Improve where maybe she should improve, but it's more to develop the understanding, to develop a sense of agency that she herself can figure out what's going on and can match her skills, her capabilities, and her ambition to the role she wants to aspire to by doubling down on these characteristics and building her mindset.
Yes. Um, Now, one again, one fit point. We don't deal with celebrity, right? So you could be looking at us saying, well, this is fine and good, but there are plenty of women leaders who are doing fine, and they are. But they have a different approach to the world than what we're talking about. We're talking about people who have a certain way of looking at everything, right? And that's why we um, are the product of the Ivy League, right? And taught at an Ivy League school. I mean, because we have a foundation in intellect and a foundation in thinking. Not that everybody we deal with is brilliant by any means. It's just they're curious,
Yeah,
right? They're curious, and that's what we care about. That they're curious, and we
right,
love people that are curious, and we don't care how much horsepower they have because if they're curious, they're fun. They're always fun.
right.
And so that's what so people that come to us to help them with things, whether it's short term or long term, they always have an aspect of being curious and want to see, is there a different way to approach this? Is there a new way? Can they learn about things? And so in a case like this is not somebody that can trade on their fame, and nor do they want to. But this is an incredibly powerful individual from an intellectual point of view and from a capability point of view. And she comes out of a very restricted culture. And we've had this before. And we've had some that have done very well by going back and applying it in their own way, right? We're very proud of some of these people.
Right.
And we're talking about some women that are at very high levels. But it's a matter of, again, a matter of fit and deciding how you might want to adapt these to your way, right? You don't want to be, and we'll end on this because you and I could go on for another 2 hours, right?
And we
Uh,
will. Clearly, we'll have another session
we
on this.
will. We'll have a follow-on session of this, but this can get people started, right?
Right.
But you need it. We're not telling you to be a certain way,
Right.
right? We're not telling you anything, right? We're just giving you information that hopefully you'll find a way to make it yours. That's the point. It's just guiding some people to make it yours, take it, internalize it, and make it yours in the way that you execute on this. So Deirdre, I'll leave the last words of this up to you.
And it does have to do with women leadership, since we're sort of on this topic. Remember that women have not had leadership positions for more than just a few decades. And the way these things always happen is that the first generation almost have to be personalities, larger than life people in politics or at the head of corporations and so forth, where you really start to get the bulk and therefore the real effect of the change in leadership, the effect of the women's movement in business, for example, is when you get the next generation and they don't have to be the role models and the personality. They don't have to be the larger than life characters, that they can move into positions optimizing their own leadership style using our concepts of mindset and characteristics and the concepts of the job and so forth, and therefore fit well in an organization without trying to match something that they can't themselves do.
Thank you. And thank you for helping us all understand this better. And the next time I'll be out of the library and we'll be talking about more less deep dive things, but with more breadth.
Very good. See you then, Tom.
All right. Bye, Deirdre.
Bye.